Hello, I'm John Cosby. Welcome to my studio. I want to show you the Notan. Notan the history of it is basically in ancient Chinese art, or could be Japanese art, where it's just black and white. So you're just basically capturing the essence of the image. And what I use a Notan for is the structure of a painting. You can lay in a painting really quickly with just the darks and the lights. So I think of it as shadow and light. So the white being the light, of course, and the darks being the shadow. And I mix up just a neutral in about a number 4 or 5 value, 40%, 50% value, somewhere in that range. And I'm going to show you the process that I go through to put that into action and quickly lay in my pattern, which handles design and it handles shadow versus light. So I can really see how much, if I got 50-50 shadow and light, I'm going to alter that a little bit with my design. I'm going to crop it, I'm going to make more shadow or more light so it's more of a third and 2/3. So let's get going on the Notan and I'll explain while I'm painting it what I'm thinking about. So the image you're looking at is the image I'm going to use as a model for this Notan, and you can see very distinctly, the reason I chose this image was because it's such obvious shadow versus light. And I'm going to use that shadow versus light pattern to place everything on my canvas really quickly. And I'm going to use a 40%, 50% mix, and you're going to be seeing it in both this color version and this black and white version. But I'm going to have you work, preferentially, you work from the color version so you can get used to seeing the image in front of you so you can work that way even in plein air. So let's get going. The way I mix up this neutral is, one of my preferences is Viridian green and red cadmium medium. Right about there, and I want enough paint to get this mix going. This is just a really nice neutral. Obviously that's very, very dark. I'm going for about 40 to 50%. So I'm pulling that into the lighter zone. And that's about 60% there. This is a 50% on my palette. So I can mix against it. And that'll give me a nice start. Nice neutral. Notice how neutral that is. It's not too red, not too green. So if you see either red or green in there, it's fine if you want to head that direction. I like to go with a real neutral so that I can paint the painting in color over the top of this and colorize these shadows and not be influenced by what's underneath there. So let's use that pool to make all these shapes that I'm going to show you on the painting. Okay, as you can see in this image, there's a lot of light and shadow happening. The light is less than the shadow. The shadow is the predominant shape in the painting. So what I'm going to be doing first is just laying out a general design, and then I'll be filling in the shadow areas only. I like to decide where my focal area is going to be in the painting and start working from there. So for instance, that cliff that goes, the light colored cliff that goes the highest, I don't want to squeeze up to the top of the painting. So I'll put a dot about where I want it, the very top of that cliff to be. And then where the light and the dark in that cliff meet each other, right about here, is the focal area. I'm going to draw all the attention right there into that. I'm pushing it over to the right a little bit more than it actually is in the design because I don't want it too close to the middle. It'll probably end up about right here and here. But so basically I've got this darker mass of cliff that comes up and back down. So I'm just drawing the big, simple shapes. This cliff, notice how geometric I'm making these. I'm not trying to follow every little detail. I'm just making it more geometric. Now, the next level down here has a big, you want to squint to see this, right about the middle of this big cliff, we have a shadow that ends this big shadow shape here. And this one has a big swoop that comes down and it encompasses the top of this little bluff in the foreground, this one. So that comes back up about mid. See how I'm just drawing line to line. And then this shadow comes all the way across, goes up a little bit here, and then it goes all the way up to the top of this other cliff and across in a shadow. So there's all the tops of my shadow all the way across. This has, of course, I've delineated the top of that cliff there. I'm also going to delineate the top of this cliff so I can make sure it's all sitting right where I want it to be, right about there. Now, my big foreground shadows. So over here, I have a couple of little shadows that I really like that come up a little higher. So that little shape on this side gives me that baseline for the next flat mesa that comes down. So in other words, I'm just lining out the big shadow shapes. See this big shadow shape right here? And that comes back up to there. This big shadow shape was automatically drawn, but it does come down the front of this cliff, jogs a little bit, and delineates the top of this light on this little cliff. And then it swoops down and out. So all of these little shapes are making my painting start to be self-designing. In other words, as long as I place the mass, see now I can see here that I'm down a little low on this because this shadow wants to come down and has a real dark presence right above this other cliff, and this other cliff is lining up right here. So this is one of these flat planes. And then the dark shadow shape is right here. Just for clarity, wouldn't do this in the field because I just paint right over it. But I'm going to get rid of that line and restructure this so that it comes behind that dark shadow. Okay, then I've got this swoops up a little bit on this side, which I like. And then it has a little swoop up on this side, and that's a light area. So when it comes down and across here, I don't need to get into every single little nuance of the shadow. I'm more interested in design at this point. But this little alcove here will be very handy for design. This is the bottom of that. And everything below this is shadow. All this is shadow. So I can just go right from here across to this shadow, and everything below is shadow also. So the only other linear thing I need to figure out is this big shadow. And I'm not tracing the top of the mesa, I'm tracing the shadow shape here. So I'm just going to place that, and above it I've got a wedge-shaped light pattern that comes in here. So this is all shadow above it. Okay, so now I'm ready to sit back and kind of look at my design, see what I've got. I'm not pinching up too close to the top here. I'm feeling pretty good about that. I may take this a little taller in this area and use this shadow to come back down to the front, because now I get my real angle up there. I want to make sure this angle is correct because this is describing the perspective of this scene. And of course there's a few loops and divots that happen in here, but in general, I'm ready to go. So that's the idea. Now I'm going to fill in the shadows to get my Notan. So I basically like to start with the biggest values first. And I'm trying to leave the little light nuggets. I don't need to leave every one of them. I can pull them back out. But once I get to the end of this process, what I'm hoping for is that it really has the feeling of the scene. This swoops down and keeps the mesa. This is that top little light mesa here. This one cuts over, down, and back. Then I've got a higher end on this end than that end. And then above that, on the light side, this is placed a little bit incorrectly. I'm going to move this back just a little bit more, like that. So in other words, these placements become self-evident once you start into the Notan. This is going to go over a little further to the right, that little wedgy peak over there. And then I can drop down into my secondary shadows here. This one I like because it points you into the scene. So I want to make sure I place that. And then this connects right to the top of this mesa. And this entire mesa comes in like this and gets real thin over here. So now all these shadows are connecting too, and that's one of the things I'm trying to create, is a connective painting, one that all the edges of the big heavy shapes connect at least visually. I want them to be very close to each other. Like these two darks don't connect physically in the painting, but very, very close to connecting. So I'm just going ahead and connecting them. I'll disconnect them like I am. I'm leaving that little bit of light shining across here, but I could always just go back in and replace that. I just want the biggest shapes. I try to leave that little bit of light in all my paintings as I'm blocking in, because then I don't have to pull any paint back off in that area to get the vibrant light. This entire dark area down here, I'm knocking in. And I'm trying to follow a little bit of the character of the landscape at the same time. So that's why these little ups and downs and divots here. And I don't need a real solid block in, but I'm looking for something, I don't mind little nuances like that in there. I'm going to be colorizing all of this anyway. Right above this, I've got this little hump that comes back up over here. I'm going to create that. And then right behind this, I'm correcting a couple things that weren't quite exactly where I want them, like that little ledge that comes along here in light has a dark that comes back here that describes the top of the ledge. And that's what I'm trying to do here, is describe a few of the little details that make up the mass of the weight of the shadow. So all of our mesas are starting to come together now and actually look like mesas. This one comes up like that and disappears into this side. So that connects these two. It has this little wedge type shadow that comes in here. So now all these shadows are leading us up into the top of this mesa. And I'm going to bring this back a little further. In other words, that'll be all the light mesa up there. Now, I haven't got all the nuances in there yet, but that's going to come during the colorization phase. And then this actually connects to this shadow over here and falls right into that forward mesa. One of the things this does for you is it gets you thinking like a painter when you're designing. Rather than, you could draw this out with black and white also, but starts you into the paint mode. So you're actually pushing paint around the canvas. And you're seeing how all these shapes are going to work together. This is my secondary mesa here. And, you know, in back of this one. So I'm leaving that little light swath, but I'm giving a little character at the end so it doesn't strongly take you out. And I'm going to use the shadow on this end of it also, so it won't pull you out of the scene too quickly. I don't want these little edges, these little arrows taking you out. So I'll contain that. Over on this side, I have the same issue. So I'm going to use this shadow of the mesa in the back to bring you back down into here. So this mesa now, that back mesa is a little bit, I'm going to make it a little wider in the final painting, but that's the final idea of pushing you up into the light there. And of course there's a couple little divots of paint that happen that describe different things that are happening here we'll get into at the end of the painting, not now. And this shadow over here does have a big dark that intercedes right there, which I like. And this is the top of that mesa. I want to make sure that it's not the same height as this mesa, which is tempting to do. And this one's a little bit wider than I've actually depicted it. So I'm going to come back in and correct that. Okay, and then after I leave the top of this mesa, it gets shadowy here. There's a couple little hints of light. And then it goes, this is the line that's depicting shadow. I think it needs to come up just a little bit higher. So I have the full Notan now of this painting. The only thing I really haven't described is a few little lines that are going to come down the mesa to describe the perspective of the mesa. And I don't need to do much of that until I colorize and put the light paint on there. But see, all the cracks that were happening in here, all that type of thing, it's absolutely irrelevant at this point in the painting. You're just simply designing the painting to work the way you want it to work, weight-wise. So don't bother with fiddling with all these little shapes. Just put the big shapes in. That'll do it. That's a Notan. Okay, so the Notan, what's its main use? Its main use is to design onto your board, your canvas, your whatever you're painting on, so that you can place your objects. And it's real easy, if you reach the point where you're finished with that Notan, to wipe the whole thing off and start over again. Then you've got a toned canvas, unless you really use a lot of turpentine and take it all off. But I tend to move shapes around if they aren't working right the way I want them. But once I get it placed, say this is the final idea that I want to use. Once I get that done, then I can go back in and start colorizing those shadows and just leave the light alone. You'll see in different videos along the course, you'll see different approaches to this design. Sometimes I do it in marker, sometimes I do it in pencil. Sometimes I just go straight to canvas, like for instance, in the boat painting that we've got from motif number 1. I had to go, it was a very quick decision process to get going on that, so that, because the clouds are coming in, so you got to just go straight to it. This process works really well if there's big simple shapes, because you can go in and drop those shapes and it freezes the light. Now if the shadows move, the Notan is set. You can see what's there. All you got to do is colorize everything and put nuances in, and then finally a little bit of detail. So I hope this is helpful for you, and it definitely is a technique I use all the time to start my paintings. So see you at the easel.